In the spring of 1776, a man in Paris finished a piece of arithmetic and knew it would cost him his job. His name was Turgot. He ran the finances of France, and he had just worked out what a war in America would do to the books. So he wrote to Louis XVI, and he didn't soften it. The first gunshot, he warned, would drive the state into bankruptcy. By May, Turgot was gone. 13 years later, the bill came due, and the person who paid it had never signed it. 200 years later, the world has agreed on why France collapsed, and the answer fits on a postcard. She spent it. The dresses, the diamonds, the palace that ate a kingdom. That answer is a lie. Not because she was careful with money, she wasn't. It's a lie because of what it's covering. Underneath the dresses sits an invoice for a war she never fought, on a continent she never saw. And hold on to one word because it comes back. America. Because when this bill finally came due, America was going to have opinions about whether it owed a single livre of it. To understand the invoice, you have to understand the grudge. In 1763, France had lost a war to Britain, and lost it badly. Canada, gone. India, gone. In the French court, that humiliation never healed. It just waited. Then, in 1775, word came across the Atlantic. Britain's own colonies were shooting at British soldiers. The foreign minister, the Comte de Vergennes, looked at that and did not see liberty. He saw a chance to bleed Britain using somebody else's blood. One problem: France was in no shape to fight anyone. So France did something remarkable. For 2 years, it fought a war it hadn't declared. The man it used wasn't a general. He was a playwright, Beaumarchais, the man who wrote The Barber of Seville. The crown handed him royal money and told him to invent a company. He called it Rodrigue Hortalez and Company. It looked like a Spanish trading house. It was a ghost. In its first year, that imaginary firm shipped the rebels 30,000 muskets and 200 cannon, and the gunpowder. In the early years of the war, the Americans made almost none of their own. 9 out of every 10 shots they fired at the British were fired with powder that came from abroad, most of it through French hands. Officially, none of this was happening. The King of France was at peace with the King of England, and the two of them went on exchanging courteous letters while French powder crossed the Atlantic under a Spanish flag. A secret war has exactly one weakness. You can hide it from the enemy. You can hide it from your own people. You cannot hide it from your books, because there was no money. There had never been any money, which meant it would have to be invented. The man who invented it was a banker from Geneva, Jacques Necker. And Necker never solved the money problem. He did something far better for his own career. He made it invisible, and I'll show you the exact page where he did it. Because Necker understood something every government has loved ever since. Taxes make people angry now, and loans make people angry later. Later is somebody else's problem. You have heard that argument in your own lifetime. Nobody has ever retired it. So he did not raise a single tax to pay for the American War. He borrowed. Between 1777 and 1781, he raised 520 million livres in loans. And to get them, he paid rates that told every lender in Europe exactly how desperate France had become. The war was running on credit, and credit runs on confidence. So in February 1781, Necker produced the most successful piece of paper in French history. He published the royal accounts. He simply printed them. The king's finances, on sale, to anyone who wanted them. No French minister had ever done that. Tens of thousands of copies went out the door, in 5 languages. People read the state budget like a novel. And what a budget it was. Money coming in, 264 million livres. Money going out, 254, which left France, in the middle of a world war, against the richest empire on earth, 10 million livres in the black. There was just one detail. The war wasn't in it. The loans, the fleets, the muskets, the entire American adventure, those sat in the extraordinary accounts. And the extraordinary accounts were not in the document. Necker had published the grocery bill for a house that was on fire. The number he printed put France 10 million livres in the black. The number he left out put it at least 46 million in the red. And that is before you count the loans it had taken to get there. One of those numbers went around Europe in 5 languages. The other one was never printed at all. And the lenders believed him. Because they believed him, they kept lending, and the interest compounded in a column nobody could see. Necker became the most popular man in France, on the strength of a book that left out the war. Now, the part people forget. It worked. At Yorktown, a French fleet sealed the bay, French troops filled out the line, French guns did much of the firing, and a British army marched out and surrendered. France didn't win America's war. The Americans did the 8 years of dying. But take away the French money, the French powder, and the French fleet, and it is very hard to see how that war ends the way it did. So what did France get for it? At the peace, it got the island of Tobago and a stretch of territory on the Senegal River. That's it. That is what the grudge bought. A small Caribbean island and a piece of African coast. Backing the Americans had cost France somewhere around 1.33 billion livres. Britain lost the war and kept the customer. American ships sailed straight back into British ports. British goods flowed back into American shops, and London no longer had to pay a penny to defend the place. France paid for the wedding and watched the couple move in with somebody else. By 1788, the debt was pushing 4 billion livres, and the men running the country had to explain where all of it had gone, to a nation that had been shown a surplus. They needed a story, ideally one with a villain in it, and nobody had to frame her. That is the part that still turns the stomach. Nobody was paid to point at the Queen. The country did it for free. The story was already written. It had been handed to them in 1785 by a con artist and a diamond necklace. The necklace was a monstrous thing, 647 diamonds, and a price of about 1.5 million livres, roughly what it cost to build a warship hanging on a chain. The court jewelers had been trying to sell it to Marie Antoinette for years. She turned them down, more than once. France, she reportedly told them, had more need of ships than of necklaces. She looked at the price of the diamonds, looked at the price of a warship, and said, "Buy the ship." For one afternoon, the biggest spender at Versailles was the only person in the room doing the arithmetic. Then a swindler named Jean de la Motte noticed something the jewelers hadn't. Cardinal de Rohan was in disgrace. The Queen wouldn't speak to him, wouldn't look at him, and he was desperate to be forgiven. So Jean's accomplice forged a set of letters in the Queen's hand and told the Cardinal that Her Majesty wanted the necklace bought for her, quietly, through a friend she could trust. The letters were signed Marie Antoinette de France. A Queen of France signs one name, just the one. Any courtier who had spent a week at Versailles knew that. The Cardinal didn't check. He bought the necklace and handed it over. Jean took the diamonds, broke them up, and sold them off in Paris and London. The Queen never ordered it, never wore it, never paid a livre for it. It made no difference. The pamphlets had their scene, and Paris had its answer. Of course she bought it. Look at her. And the name they gave her never washed off. Madame Difficile. In 1786, the Controller General Calonne went to Louis XVI and told him the truth. The state could not pay. It could not borrow. The famous surplus was, in the polite language of finance, no longer operative. So the king summoned the Assembly of Notables, the richest men in France, and asked them to approve new taxes. They refused. Why should they pay for a hole they hadn't dug? And there, cornered, out of money, out of credit, out of options, The king reached for the last instrument the French crown had left. He called the Estates General. It had not met in 175 years. The last time those men sat down together, Shakespeare was still alive. And it was summoned for one reason, and one reason only: the debt. Because by 1788, the books were finally open, all of them. The extraordinary accounts, the loans, the fleets. The column Necker had left out was on the page at last with a number next to it. And now we can do the arithmetic nobody in the street was doing. Let's be fair to the mob first. She did spend. The gambling debts were real. The wardrobe was absurd. She built herself a private village in the grounds of Versailles, a toy farm with a toy dairy, while Paris queued for bread. Fine, give the mob all of it, put every livre on the table. Out of every 100 livres France spent that year, the entire court, Versailles, a household of 16,000 people, the queen, the dresses, the parties, all of it, took about 6. The interest on the debt took about 50. 50. So you could have burned Versailles to the ground, sold her wardrobe down to the last ribbon, and canceled every party in France. And in the morning the whole would still have been there, breathing. Next to the interest on that war, the dresses were a rounding error. The war was the budget. Historians still argue about everything else that fed the revolution: the bread, the harvests, the ideas coming out of the coffee houses. That argument is older than the Republic, and it will outlive all of us. Nobody argues about why the king had to summon that assembly. He was broke. And he was broke because of a war fought on the other side of the ocean, for a country that didn't exist yet. America didn't cause the French Revolution. It built the bill that made the king call the men who ended him. And they sat down, looked at the accounts, and decided that as long as they were there, they'd have some freedom of their own. 13 years earlier, Turgot had put all of it in a single sentence and been fired for the offense of being right too early. The first gunshot would drive the state into bankruptcy. It took 13 years, but it went off, exactly on schedule. As for Beaumarchais, the playwright, the ghost company, the muskets, and the powder, he spent the rest of his life sending America invoices. Congress finally asked its own Treasury Secretary to audit the claim. Alexander Hamilton went through the books and put the figure at 2,280,000 francs. Congress ignored him. Beaumarchais died waiting in 1799. In 1835, 36 years after he was in the ground, Congress offered his heirs 800,000 francs, about a third of what Hamilton said they were owed. Take it or take nothing. They took it. And the king's loans? The ones that bought the muskets, the powder, and the fleet? Remember the word I told you to hold on to. Because when the king was executed, Hamilton did not say the debt was dead. He said something colder. Pay a government that might not survive the year, and you may end up paying the whole thing, twice. So he froze the payments. And he argued that America now had the right to walk away from the alliance altogether. The treaties had been signed with a king who no longer had a head. Jefferson's answer was one line. The treaty was not with Louis Capet, it was with France. Washington sided with Jefferson. America kept paying. In 1795, the government loans were finally cleared, though not with American gold. A financier named James Swan took the debt onto himself, paid Paris, and sold the paper on to private investors at a profit. America didn't erase the bill, it changed who it owed. And the Paris that got paid was the Republic, the one that had killed the king who signed the checks. And the woman they blamed for all of it never signed a thing. Does America still owe France anything? I'll be in the comments.